In the summer of 1943, with the Soviet army advancing and Allied bombs falling, the Hungarian Royal Army desperately needed new planes. They received a delivery of what they hoped would be their salvation. But these weren't some secret weapons. These were the cast-offs, the Messerschmitt 210 Zerstörers that Nazi Germany had deemed too flawed for its own air force. The Germans wrote them off as a failure, but the Hungarians, driven by sheer necessity, refused to give up. The engineers did what the Germans couldn't. They took the plane everyone else had abandoned and transformed it. This is the story of how a small nation, through innovation and ingenuity, turned a German failure into a successful heavy fighter. Growing up and learning about World War II, I was always captivated by the story of the Messerschmitt Bf-110 and the Me-210 Zerstörers. I'm not sure if it was their unique design or the underdog situation that these planes were often pushed into roles they were not designed for, and yet their pilots had to do it anyway. But to this day, despite all their flaws and shortcomings, these are still my favorite aircrafts from World War II. At the start of the Second World War, Germany's Luftwaffe had a fearsome weapon, the Messerschmitt Bf-110, the Zerstörer or destroyer. It was designed to be a long-range bomber escort, a powerful fighter that could dominate the skies. But over the field of England, it met a harsh reality. Against modern fighters like the Spitfire, the Bf-110 was too slow and clumsy. The destroyer was becoming the destroyed. Germany needed a replacement. On paper, Messerschmitt had the perfect answer, the Me-210. It was a high-tech plane, designed to be nearly as fast as the single-engine fighters of the day. It featured two powerful engines, an internal bomb bay, and a highly advanced remote-control defensive armament system that gave the gunner an unparalleled field of fire. The German High Command was so confident, so sure that they had their next super weapon, that they placed an order for 1,000 aircraft before a single prototype had even left the ground. It would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. Even the first flight was a disaster. The test pilot reported the plane was dangerously unstable. It would snake through the air, making it impossible to hold a steady course. Messerschmitt's engineers tried to fix it, replacing the twin rudders used on the Bf-110 with a single massive tail fin. It had almost no effect. But this was not all. It suffered from terrible stalls. With little to no warning, especially in a turn, the wings would lose lift and the plane would whip into a violent spin. The second prototype was lost this way. The verdict from Messerschmitt's own chief test pilot was that the Me-210 had all the least desirable attributes an airplane could possess. 16 prototypes and 96 pre-production models failed to solve the issue. Regardless, the Germans were desperate to replace the Bf-110s currently in service, ordered full production in early 1941. When it was finally delivered to combat pilots in 1942, they hated it. Production was stopped after just 1 month. Hundreds of unfinished planes were put into storage. The project was a public humiliation that nearly destroyed the famous Messerschmitt company. Germany's wonder weapon was a complete and utter failure. But the story of the Me-210 was not over. For Germany's ally, Hungary, the failed plane was an opportunity. So Hungary purchased the license to build the aircrafts at the Danube aircraft factory. Under the deal, some of the planes built would go to the German Luftwaffe. The Hungarians didn't just copy the German design. They started with the later model that the Germans had already tried to fix by lengthening the fuselage, but the Hungarian engineers knew that this wasn't enough. They conducted their own analysis and discovered the real source of the plane's deadly habits. They made several crucial changes that transformed the aircraft. For example, removing the complicated armor plating or replacing the engine to a more powerful one. But the most important change was to the wings. The Hungarian engineers redesigned them with a slight 4-degree sweepback. This small change had a massive effect. It finally cured the terrible instability. This approach, looking at the problem with fresh eyes, allowed the Hungarians to solve a puzzle that defeated the German designers. The result was the Messerschmitt Me-210 Ca-1. The plane the Germans couldn't tame was finally ready for war. But this was not all the changes. Some of the planes were modified to carry a 40mm Bofors autocannon in the lower fuselage in order to destroy Allied bombers. In addition, some of the aircraft could also carry 152mm rockets for ground attack. The first planes were delivered in July 1943, and until the end of the production 270 planes were produced. 160 was handed over to the Hungarian Air Force and 110 was handed over to Germany. On the Eastern Front, the Hungarian Mi-210 proved to be a deadly weapon. It was used as a fast bomber and a devastating ground attack aircraft. One Hungarian pilot, Lieutenant Edgar Zuna, recalled that its cannons were particularly effective when strafing the advancing Russian forces. Unlike the Germans, Hungarian pilots grew to respect the aircraft, calling it a handful but a powerful weapon. The planes were assigned to the fast bomber squadrons of the 102/1 Sas, 102/2 Tigris and Villam units, as well as the 5/1 Bagoy night fighters. But the Hungarians faced another enemy, huge formations of American heavy bombers. To attack these flying fortresses, they turned the Mi-210s into specialized bomber destroyers. They armed them with heavy 152mm rockets to fire into bomber formations, and in few special planes, they fitted a massive 40mm Bofors cannon into the bomb bay, turning the fighter into a flying anti-aircraft gun capable of ripping a bomber from the sky. The toughness of the Hungarian-built plane became legendary. In March 1945, with the war nearly over, Lieutenant Zuna was ordered to fly his Mi-210 to a new base in Austria. Fuel was so scarce that his plane was stripped of all guns and ammunition to save weight. It was completely unarmed. Flying low over the Lake Fertő, he felt the sudden bump. He thought it was just turbulence, but when he landed, he saw what happened. The bump was the sound of his propeller smashing into the sand at the beach of the lake. Incredibly, the powerful Daimler-Benz engines never quit. He landed only with minutes of fuel to spare. It was a testament to the incredible ruggedness of the machine the Hungarians had perfected. The Messerschmitt 210 began its life as one of the great failures of aviation history of World War II. A plane so dangerous, its own creators gave up on it. But in the hands of Hungarian engineers, it was reborn. Through clever and pragmatic design, it became the Mi-210 Ca-1, a stable, powerful and respectable warplane. The Hungarian Mi-210s fought effectively until the very end of the war. Their final fate was tragic. In March 1945, with no fuel left to fly, the last of the planes were destroyed by their own crews. It was a quiet end for a flawed design, redeemed by engineering skill that became a Hungarian legend.